So welcome everyone to the session, and for the guys listening live and watching live, um, just to say that you're on mute and Janie and myself can't see you, so we will interact with you on the chat panel, which you should see the control for that at the bottom of your screen. So session today will run for up to an hour, depending on the questions and the conversation that we're having. And just a couple of bits about housekeeping just before I introduce the session. Firstly, it's really good to close down any other applications that you may have open, and that's purely just to manage the transmission speed. And really recommend having a pen and paper handy, as always, just to capture any thoughts as we're working through the session. And finally, as we're talking about presence today, you may just want to think about anything else you need to do, like perhaps put the mobile phone somewhere else, or perhaps close a door, just so you can be fully with us for the next period of time. So it's a delight today to have this conversation with a dear friend and a colleague, Janie Van Hool. And I've known Janie for a long time now, and I first connected with Janie as a result of her work, really, and I was working with her and bringing her into the organisation that I worked for to work with various leaders. So Janie's a one-to-one coach, she's a facilitator, she's an author, and I could go on really, but yeah, I know what you're like. So I invited Janie to this conversation because she specialises and has a real expertise and a lot to do with her background, but also the research that she carried out, etc., working with people to really enable them to maximise their presence in relationship, whether that's one-to-one or with group. And I think for us as coaches and facilitators, this is such an important foundation in terms of how we're being in our work. And that's why I was really excited that Janie said yes to do this. So thank you firstly, Janie.
Oh, it's a pleasure, such a pleasure.
And just actually, let me just go to the group first of all, because they've joined us and talking to the group now, you've joined us because you're hopefully interested in this topic. So just to give Janie and I a sense of, where we're going to focus this conversation today, it'd be great just to hear some thoughts from you, and please use the chat panel for this, in terms of, the questions that you're holding, that you would like to hear from Janie during this session. So your questions around this topic, developing your presence, where's your interest? So I'm just going to give you a couple of moments to add anything into the chat panel. And then what I'll do is I'll build those into our dialogue. So Jenny, would just give the group a short space just to respond.
No, it'd be fascinating actually to hear, because it's nice to be able to think of this subject in a targeted way about coaching and facilitation, because a lot of the time requests to develop presence are much more about the performance part of the piece. And so it's an interesting difference, no less, no more. Oh, they're popping in.
Great. Great. So I can see some questions coming through, such as what does good presence look like? Coaching presence in the context of virtual sessions.
Yeah.
How do you maximize in different settings, i.e. face-to-face, group versus individual, face-to-face and video, sorry. And being present in an environment that is unfamiliar and perhaps uncomfortable. Yeah, so a few thoughts there coming through, and feel free to add as we're going through the session. So I thought Janie would start with perhaps a bit more understanding about you, and rather than me just talking about your biog, that I sort of added a short biog to the invitation to this session. But perhaps if it's okay, start by sharing with us your own journey into this topic.
Sure. Yes, not linear. Actually, I started out my life as an actress. I trained classically to be a theatre actress. And my first job was in Iraq, interestingly, and I did a lot of international touring, And acting is a very interesting career because there are so many different options to explore. And what happened to me as I began to work more and more in theatre was that some of the directors I worked with would also make a bit more of a comfortable living, if you like, by working in a corporate setting. And I developed part of my acting business was professionally presenting, running conferences, presenting at conferences more broadly. And of course, people would ask, some of the speakers from organizations would ask for my support in terms of how they presented. And when I realized that I was, Kate Winslet was safe, let's face it, I wasn't going to be the next Oscar winner. I decided that I wanted to do something a little bit more fulfilling, because acting is really taking instructions in many ways, fulfilling other people's creative ideas. So I took a master's degree in voice because I thought it would be very interesting to teach voice with actors and work in the entertainment industry that way. But in the way that these amazing things happen, I got into a conversation with a lady on a beach in Norfolk. And at the time I was doing my master's in voice, and she said, "Oh, that sounds really interesting. I wonder if you could possibly do some work with the chief exec of my organization, because he's a very poor communicator. And he struggles in meetings to connect with people." And I mean, I must tell you, I had no idea what I was doing. I was really flying by the seat of my pants. But I said, I'm sure I could do something with him. And actually, I loved it. It was such an exciting moment in my life when the things that I felt I could do and the skills that I knew I had suddenly became valuable, and I could pull them together. And I worked with him for about 6 years, and very generously they referred me to business schools and other organizations. So, the fact that Damien and I connected was really happy happenstance, because I've never had a business card or a website or done things in a traditional way, but I've had the great fortune to do this work in organizations as diverse as mining in Australia to investment banking in Singapore and Europe, and many places in between. And of course, the reason is that a lot of people who are technically excellent and develop skills in a particular area wouldn't necessarily know what a performer might have discovered in an investigation like that. So I often say I just fell into it, but it was certainly a combination of skills, and largely an ability to build good relationships with people in different organizations, which means that they've trusted me, I think, to pass on some of that and work with certainly some of the more senior people who, as we all know, can be challenging, to say the least.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, great, Janie. And so when we're talking about presence, so one of the questions was, what does good presence look like?
Yeah.
Now, if we put it in this context as coaches, as facilitators, what are your thoughts around that?
I think this is the most important question, actually, because when I started working with leaders in organizations, this is 18, 19 years ago, and there was still that perception from people that presence was about being the biggest personality in the room, something very obvious. You walk into the room and everybody knows that you're there. And I always find that a bit of a turn-off, because it's often put on. And there's the founder of the European movement of dance, who's a chap called Rudolf Laban, or was a chap called Rudolf Laban. And I found a quote of his very early on in my master's, which was that presence is connecting with the thoughts and feelings of others. And I've always found real magic in that, because in truth, I don't think it matters if you're standing at the front of a stage in a conference and you've got 2,000 people in the audience, or whether you're working one-on-one with a coachee. That sense of making those connections is critical. And that is what good presence is, literally being in the room or in the conversation. And whilst I know that a lot of people think, there must be some craft to it, I'm supposed to do something, actually the frame for me is you've got to want to be there. And in many complex ways, wanting to be there can be one of the hardest tasks, because there's so much else going on. There's as you were saying at the setup, Damien, the phone buzzes, the baby wakes up, the stuff that's nagging away at us can really stop that presence. And for me, that's the thing just to keep coming back to, is trying to find that way of showing and feeling that we want to be there.
No, lovely, Janie. And there's a point that's just come through from Richard around, how does presence relate to being authentic? So just based on what you just said, perhaps what are your thoughts around that?
The dog's just left the room. That's really good. Well, I think we would all know that if it's not authentic, you can really sense it. And as a coach, as a facilitator, anything that feels fake, anything that feels artificial, I think is potentially pretty damaging to the overall impact that we have. Having said that, I don't suppose you've shared with everyone, Damien, you're not feeling very well today. You probably don't feel like working, but actually there are times when we have to master ourselves to be able to get the job done, or to be able to, we can't change everything all the time. So in many respects, the authenticity piece is managing our state and being really clear with our intention. So, for example, if my intention is to be confident, that's not going to look how you would when you're being confident, but I have to master it in my own way. And for that, of course, the self-awareness piece is absolutely key. And this is where Damien and I work so well together, I believe, is the concept of mindfulness and technique for creating presence has a beautiful synergy, because if you can notice how you are and manage degrees around that, you can really get somewhere.
Yeah, and I mean, where it takes me, the definition that I really liked was the, developing presence is the cultivation of our being.
Yeah, well, that's
lovely. And that's sort of beingness in terms of our work, Janie, because like you say, this isn't about me doing something to be present. This is about the fact your words, choosing to be here and really being here.
Yeah.
So, for I keep saying coaches and facilitators, I'm conscious that, people are here for a reason.
Yeah.
What are some things that you would say from your experience?
Yeah.
If they're going into, perhaps picking up on Dina's point around, an uncomfortable environment or an unfamiliar environment, and perhaps we're not feeling that we're fully connected. What are some things that you've learned that may support people?
I'm a big fan of I would call it a pre-performance routine as an actor, actually, but I think there's great comfort in a routine that we know gets us into the right place. And I have to say, I've found over the years that I've been able to compress that into a very short space of time. It could be 30 seconds outside of the room, just being conscious of our physical presence, because we leak so many clear messages. And for me, and I'm sure everybody here that has facilitation experience, you can look around a table and you can really see who doesn't want to be in that room, who is feeling awkward and uncomfortable, who is really excited and engaged and up for the conversation. And it's a decision about, how do I want to manifest my presence? Do I want to, as a coach, for example, present a fairly neutral posture, position? Do I want to look relaxed, at ease? It's being so self-aware of the messages the body is delivering. And for me, that starts outside of the room. What am I bringing into the room? A very clear intention, and probably something like a few yoga breaths, or a bit of shoulder loosening, a bit of shaking out tension. Because of course, if some of us are nervous, it's a difficult conversation. How am I going to manage these people? I've been found doing star jumps in the toilet, burning off a few degrees of adrenaline from my system. Being aware of my facial expression. I think I wouldn't be a very good poker player. So sometimes I have to be very conscious. I can be found sort of scrunching up my face and releasing the tension, just to make sure that what I'm bringing into the room is congruent. So I would encourage everyone to develop something that feels like, if I do this for 2 minutes, and then I go into the situation. It might be physical, it might be breath, it might be, this is also physical, but some stretching, it might be a poem, it might be a piece of music, just stuff that makes us go, yeah, okay, I'm ready.
And thank you. And I suppose linking back to your other point around intentionality and, having intention to really be present, and then the ritual supporting that. And
Yes.
so how about other resources? Like, I don't know if there's models or other, key resources that would be useful for people perhaps to connect to after this session. So any thoughts around that in terms of developing presence?
I mean, it's a really interesting one, because there are models, but they're all pretty simple. I'm quite a fan of the Gestalt model in terms of facilitators' presence, which is just a triangle. And the 3 prongs of the triangle are to consider who you are, values, things that you hold absolutely dear and true, being very conscious of what those things are and feeling confident in them, what you do. So it might be a job role, or it might be a task, or it might be how you approach your daily activities. And then really critically, in terms of presence, how you show up, which again is back to this sense of self-management. But I mean, for me, the most important thing, and it's not a model, but the most important thing is to be, it sounds a little bit contra to what I've already said, but it's to develop an awareness. You're in the room. You might also be on the other side of the room, like a camera, watching yourself. So there's that sense of, what am I doing? I'm consciously thinking, is this too much in terms of gesture? Is it too little? Do I need to move? Do I need to be absolutely still? Do I need to nod? Do I need to smile? Just noticing what we're doing, because I believe that presence is a really infectious state. So how we are is how they are. And of course, as facilitators and coaches, this is the really critical point, because we can overlead, and which is the really interesting dissonance in terms of performance presence and coach or facilitator presence, where we're not trying to impose our presence. We are literally being present, able to respond, able to adapt. And I just think it's really important to feel good about yourself, actually. I think if we are feeling underconfident, unfit, unwell, unprepared, lots of uns, if we're feeling those things, that can impair our ability to connect and be present. So there's a lot of work goes into feeling good about yourself. Eat well, exercise, sleep well. Then it's much easier to be present, because we're not so distracted by our own harsh judgments on ourselves.
Thank you. Yeah, and so just picking up on that point of, when we're fully there, that sense of that observation of ourselves in terms of really noticing how we are in relationship to others, and then also picking up on your earlier point and sensing the room as well, and what the room, the group, or the individual actually is. It may be experiencing from us as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, in Myers-Briggs terms, I'm an ENFP, which means I'm a chameleon. So it's very easy for me to adapt. And it took me years to realize that other people don't necessarily find that as easy. Actually, there's great strength in not being able to do it, because you can always bring an authenticity, which sometimes I think, I sometimes think, I don't know. Am I quiet and still? Am I loud and bold? I don't know, because I can be all of those things in 1 5-minute conversation. But to create great presence, and the people I have seen do it magnificently. I'm thinking of a Gestalt facilitation expert called Marianne Rainey. I mean, wow, an unforgettable presence, the most graceful, centered, present, noticing person I think I've ever met. An incredible experience to be taught by her. But not an easy one, I might say. But that really I found so inspirational. She was probably in her 60s, is probably in her 60s, the serenity and the neutrality in her facilitation and coaching presence was just beautiful. I mean, that's what I'm aspiring to. I have a long way to go.
And again, you know, just my sense around the invitation then to connect as a result of your experience of being with her, which obviously is a key piece here. So if there, Janie, let's just play with this, okay? And I'm, you know, you may want to say no at this point, but you know, the group or who on the phone, I'm sure would appreciate a bit of experiential work as well.
Yeah.
Us just talking. So, is there anything we could do right now that, you know, is a little exercise or something that you do just to help people sort of connect to their sort of presence? And
well, I mean, one of my all-time favorite exercises, actually, this came about. I was watching the telly in the States. I do love a bit of American telly. And there was a woman on the telly called Peggy Noonan, who might be familiar to some of the group, but she's an American political pundit, a remarkably bright, amazing woman. She used to write speeches for Ronald Reagan and for George Bush Sr. And she was being interviewed on the TV, and she said something that I thought was just fantastic as a presence point. Because she said, when a president is first inaugurated, it can be pretty stressful, which I'm sure is true. But she said, what happens about 4 or 5 months into their role? She said, you can watch them off stage and they're about to go on and deliver an address to the nation. And she said, they literally breathe in the presidency. And it was a moment of triumph for me, because, of course, that is something that actors do. But how we breathe is how we are. And so an exercise that I've used consistently over the years when I'm trying to think of, well, what kind of presence do I want to bring, is to just consider 3 words that represent how I might want to be in a particular situation, whether it's coaching or managing a difficult group from a facilitation perspective, or even as a performer. You know, I might think of 3 words that guide me. As a coach, it might be curious, it might be patient, it might be generous, or it might be, you know, dynamic, bold, challenging. I mean, it really doesn't matter as long as those 3 words do something for us. And then the objective is simply to take a couple of minutes and focus on those words. 10 breaths. So as you're sitting, wherever you're sitting, if you can sit well, of course, to breathe and allow energy to flow around our bodies, you know, we need space. So if you can sit with both feet planted on the ground, and if you can allow your spine to be long and your head to just rest on the top of your spine freely and at ease, and if you would like to close your eyes, and then I'm just going to invite you to breathe in and out 10 times. And the first 3 of those breaths, you will repeat the first of your chosen words. No effort intended here. It's just really normal breathing. So in and out through the nose, if you can, to manage the steady flow of breath. And then when you come to the next 3 breaths, it's the second of your chosen words. Just let it go through your mind. You've all worked with Damien, I'm sure, so you'll know that other thoughts come in, but just keep coming back to that word. And then the third 3 breaths would be the third of your chosen words. And it's just a little soft, gentle meditation on how you're going to be. And then when you come to the 10th breath, you just repeat all 3 words together. So it balances, really, for me, a sense of intention, clarity. This is the kind of presence I'm going to bring into the room in this experience, and just giving it a little bit of space. And actually, I mean, of course, this is something that, you know, Buddhist monks have been doing for 2,000 years. Sports teams do it together so they can decide how to be on the pitch. But I think because our presence is so varied, we can be so many different things. Confident and bold at a party, nervous at an interview, furious with poor customer service, calm and relaxed when we first arrive on holiday. All of those things we are all of. And it really helps me to decide which version of myself would I like to bring into this situation. And anytime I begin to lose it, anytime I feel the irritation rising or the anxiety perhaps popping up, or I'm feeling a bit tired and I can't be bothered. Yesterday afternoon I was with a group. They were hard work. It was hot. I'd been there all day. I just found myself, we called a break, and I just found myself sitting quietly under a tree, calling on energy, vitality, love, because I just really needed to love them a bit, and it's incredibly helpful. It's just, we breathe differently according to how we want to be. And I have found that very useful over the years. Similarly, I think also there's something about perhaps under pressure, you might want to pay a bit of physical attention. So again, you're sitting well. And this is something that, you can do in a very exaggerated way, or you can do it in a very gentle way, but it's just tensing and releasing. You could be sitting around a meeting room table, tensing your feet, clenching your butt, knotting your tummy, just slightly tightening the elbows, and then letting that go. And it tends to encourage us to breathe out a little bit. And of course, whenever we're in a pressurized situation, which tends to reduce our presence because we lose control a little bit, just that tense and release encourages the out breath, which makes us relax a little bit more. And although I avoid the word relax, because that's a bit sort of, you can overdo that, right? It can be very laid back, too laid back. But I like a bit of ease. I think ease has an element of relaxation about it, but just that appropriate energy, a little bit of the energy that sometimes increases our presence, because that allows us to look more like we want to be there. So the combination of physical awareness and that decision, Damien knows with this experience of this remarkable, beautiful woman, Marianne Rainey, constantly saying to me, "What is your intention?" And I couldn't answer her often. So it's just a way for me of coming back and clarifying, this is my intention. My intention is to be clear. My intention is to be confident. My intention is to be warm. That I can manage.
Thank you. And so with that in mind, now picking up perhaps on the question around, differences. So if we're working virtually, like me and you now, in this space versus when we're face to face with clients, thoughts around, differences to consider.
This is a really interesting one, because I think in the main, my experience is that people prefer being face to face. This is it's a new environment for us to learn to connect. And, over the years, I would often say, because as an actress, of course, I did a lot of voiceover work. So I spent a lot of time in a voice booth communicating. I used to find it really exhausting. It's much more tiring for me as an extrovert to be in that vacuum, if you like, rather than face to face. I think some of these things are technique based. So, I'm not looking at Damien at all. I'm looking straight down the lens of the camera, and I can sort of see him in my periphery. But if I want to connect, I've got to look through the lens. Sometimes, particularly if we're on the phone and we can't see the other person, it's incredibly helpful if you've got a picture of them or you are visualizing somebody. Some of those conference call, what do you call those? It's like the spider machine thing on the table. We just sort of talking into a vacuum. The voice has no focus. It's just bleeding, if you like, into the air. It's really important to remember or to place our direct focus on the spider. And I think, I don't want to call it small talk, but taking the time to connect in a light-hearted, easy way before you get to the nitty-gritty of a conversation, for me, is all the more important. I'd probably take longer to do that in a virtual environment than I might face-to-face, because we can't we can't sniff, literally, can we? We have to build the rapport more carefully, more intentionally. Having said that, I think it's often easier to be, certainly for the coachee, I've noticed that people can be much more open more quickly because there is that the comfort of distance and space. So, I mean, it's a new learning, but I think the intention to connect, I think you have to use a lot more vocal energy and a lot more eye contact and connected energy than I might use face to face. That's why it feels like hard work for me, particularly on the phone. You have to be really conscious of very thorough and deliberate articulation. You have to use a lot of good breath. If you can stand to communicate over the phone, there's a lot more energy coming from the body than if we're sitting, back on a phone like that, which where everything is collapsed. We can't breathe efficiently. We don't tend to communicate with the same power.
Thank you.
There is the advantage of being at home, of course, so that's quite nice. Always go and have a cup of tea afterwards.
Yeah. So before I forget, Patricia's just asked how you spell Marianne's surname.
Mary Ann. So it's the first word Mary, then a little dash, A-double-N, and then her surname is Rainey, R-A-I-N-E-Y.
Okay.
Just amazing. When you wish that someone was in your life all the time, and she can't be.
Yeah.
But she does run amazing organizational development programs.
Mm-hmm.
She's fantastic.
Great. So you've covered a lot of this, but let's just, I suppose, make the transition. So, if we've got clients, perhaps, as coaches that, for some of them, they bring that they want to, have greater presence in their role. Or the way that they're leading their team, etc. So as coaches, I'm sure some people on the call will be interested in terms of perhaps people that are going for promotion, maybe going front of panels. What advice would you give for coaches if this is something that they're interested, or they've got a client that may want to work on this?
I mean, the first and foremost thing I would suggest that we've got to get people to accept is that if they want to increase their presence, or they want to have more presence in particular environments, if they're preparing for an interview or whatever, they've got to learn to be comfortable with discomfort. Because what I have learned is if you want a more expressive voice, guess what? You've got to speak more expressively. It's going to feel a little bit uncomfortable. If you've got to promote yourself in an organization so that people are more aware of your skills and the value that you add, you're going to have to be uncomfortable in the sense you're going to have to talk about yourself a little bit more. So, and I could go on, but mostly I think people are looking for a bit of a magic pill. I need more presence. Okay, great. Well, then what are we going to do differently? And I do notice a lot of people want to change, but are nervous about doing things differently. So it's trying to help them understand that you don't have to go from 0 to 100. You don't have to be, if you're the quietest, most reserved engineer, you don't have to cartwheel into a meeting and sing a song. There are many grades in between, of course. So I think nudging people forward, getting them to celebrate what they've done. I mean, I think as soon as you break a habit, it's gone. It's not a habit anymore. So if, for example, it's getting people to talk about what value they've added in the organization in the last week, how best can they do that? Can they do that by email? Can they have a conversation with a line manager? If it's about getting presence in terms of speaking out in meetings, it's helping them understand, where are you going to sit so that you're really obvious to the room, not hiding at the end of the table next to some enormous bloke who might hide you. Where are you going to sit so that you can catch the eye of the person who might be able to ask you a question? Can you have a conversation with that person before the meeting to say, really struggling to speak up here, please could I ask you to direct a question towards me and I will answer it. You know, they're tiny things, or they seem like tiny things to us, but for some people, these are big leaps. Can they reach out to someone and have a coffee, someone that they haven't met previously? Could they think about what are those 3 words that I identify that I want to be in that next meeting? Can you get them to practice that exercise and see how differently they walk around the room when they've done it? Little steps that nudge people forward and just keep reminding them they are going to feel uncomfortable. Some of the most successful actors that I've ever worked with are absolutely paralyzed with nerves. Some of the biggest and most successful leaders I've worked with have been people who suffer from imposter syndrome. So I think what the privilege I've experienced in my role is to realize that we're all suffering the same stuff. But some people are just that bit bolder about putting themselves in those uncomfortable positions. But of course, we all know once you've done it, you just feel great. So then it becomes a bit more addictive. I mean, things like confidence building, things like Toastmasters as an organization to get people used to standing up and speaking. It's not about standing up and speaking, but it's really about thinking, wow, I can do this. So it's finding the challenge that will not terrify them, but just nudge them forward a little bit.
No, great, Janie. Thank you. And again, it just resonates because I think a lot of our work when we work with facilitators and coaches is helping them be comfortable with being uncomfortable as well in terms of the situations that they're in.
Absolutely. You know, if you're working with a big, noisy group of leaders around a table who are in a really difficult position with the business, it sends shivery sweat down my spine to think, how am I going to challenge them? Because they could look at me and go, what the hell do you know? You studied Shakespeare. But actually, you know, I have to face into that. I have to ask the question. I have to look them in the eye and challenge them. And, you know, then afterwards I'll sit down with a cup of tea and shake and go, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. But actually, you know, that's what builds our toolkit. I just try and be Marianne Rainey.
So I'm just going to pause again. There's a couple of other questions that I'd like to ask, but I'm just going to see if there's anything else emerging from the group, and that would just give me a chance to scroll through the questions as well. So anything else that, you know, perhaps people are interested in, we can always build on anything that Janie said, but again, just chance for you to participate now in the discussion if you'd like to. So I'm just going to flip back because there's a point from Melanie about the use of present language. And again, I suppose I'm just curious, bearing in mind your expertise around voice, around language, what are your thoughts around that in terms of presence?
If you're working with a coachee, I think one of the things that is important to raise awareness of are vocal habits. I'm not sure if this is answering Melanie's question, but a lot of us don't have a full awareness of the words we're using. And of course, we are increasingly aware in relation to women of the use of minimizing language. Oh, hello, it's just me. I'm quite, perhaps, you know, lots of apology in language. So if we can strip out that rather unhelpful language, because it does diminish the power of our presence, that seems like an important thing to do. For all of us, I don't know if you've, I'm waving my iPhone here, but there's let me show you, I'm sure you've got, there's a voice memo, voice notes recorder on it, but I'm sure everyone is very familiar with it. But perhaps next time you're on a call, you could record some of it and play it back and pay attention to the quality of the language choices that you're using, because half the time I think we're less than aware, and that's where all these habits creep in. Ooh, that it's not so much the language, but it's being aware of the stuff that's getting in the way of the power of our language. So the para-language, if you like, can have a huge impact. The other piece of research, of course, that's interesting is a lot of the language associated with presence is very male-oriented. Dominant, authority, power, strength, fight, battle. So the associations of strong presence, certainly in terms of language, might be very male-oriented, certainly very extroverted. And I think it's important that we challenge that and find softer terms, be bold to use words that stand out. I mean, the psychological definition of presence is about difference. So if we use the word love, if we use the word kind, things that aren't very corporate, that automatically has a presence. It creates presence because it's stuff that we're not used to hearing. And I think particularly what I learned in my Gestalt training was that there's something called the PWI, the Perceived Weirdness Index. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I had never heard of it. I loved it. But the idea that in our role, we do need a bit of perceived weirdness. We do need to be distinctive and stand out and have a presence that is different, but not so much that we can't be connected with. So we can't go in being exactly the same and using exactly their language, because it doesn't have any impact. And we can't go in a bikini and wellies and start talking about, flower power in the 1970s, because that's too much. But it's a good question, I think, because using language that is different to the organizational norm will make people sit up. But that's contextual, and you would know. If you're working in an advertising agency, they know those terms. So we have to think of something different.
And just looking at the questions, we sort of touched on this earlier, but Richard's just raised the point. In terms of self-awareness, what are your thoughts around confidence, example public speaking, and how self-talk can build barriers to being present?
Yeah, it really can, can't it? It really can. I mean, and almost everyone that I am asked to work with will suffer that inner voice, and it's endemic. I mean, it can be with the chief exec of the biggest company. I worked with a chief exec a couple of years ago who's got 300,000 people working for him, and he just said, I think I've lost my confidence. Some of the most successful actors I've worked with can't do theatre work anymore because that inner demon just constantly niggling at them. I used to do a bit of stand-up years ago, and actually I call it heckling. It's inner heckling, external heckling. It's the stuff that disrupts and distracts, which is why I suggest having those really clear 3 words that you can come back to over and over. Because in many respects, when my inner voice is going, what the hell are you talking about? You've got no idea. I can come back to that and go, calm, organized, patient, and it helps. But I think the inner voice, really, when you're working with coachees, the most important thing is to get them to breathe right. And I know there are probably some people on the call that are experienced in yoga or, mindfulness, other practices that are breath related. It is absolutely key. I have a friend of mine once going through therapy, really big therapy, had some terrible issues, and her marriage had broken up, and she did some really great thinking about her life, but her shoulders were earrings, and she was constantly breathing in a really adrenalized way. Well, she's never going to feel any better. And of course, how we breathe gives vent to this anxiety, this anxious voice. So to increase people's confidence, get them to breathe out. That's it for me. It's just sort of the minute, like when you're on holiday and you arrive and you sit on your sunbed and you lie back and go, just get people to breathe out. because without that, they'll never get in. You can't think yourself into confidence. You can't think yourself out of anxiety. You have to get your body on board. And that starts with how you breathe.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. And I'm going to go a bit off track here because, you know, part of these webinars have been sort of hearing from people with experiences of operating as coaches, as facilitators. And I just suppose from your experience, Janie, you know, if there's any advice you would give to people that are, you know, developing as coaches now and moving into, you know, this profession, what are the key things that you've learned that you'd just like to share?
Think about where you are on the perceived weirdness index, because I think one of the jobs of a coach is to have the courage to ask the questions or to do things differently in a way that, you know, might feel, oh, I think this person's not going to like this. That's okay. You know, put them in those places where they're going to feel a bit odd and uncomfortable, because that's the learning edge. I'm part of my acting thing is doing stuff rather than talking about stuff. So I think even if you can take your coachee out and walk with them to have a conversation rather than sit and chew stuff over endlessly, sometimes that can be a really transformative experience. And this is, I don't want this to sound patronizing at all, but I think working on ourselves, just constantly working on ourselves, physically, mentally, emotionally, that is just, it's a life's work. I mean, I am 51 and I'm still, God, I sometimes think I'm the world's worst listener. I work at it every day. And it's a life's work. So I think recognizing that we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to have all the answers. We just have to look after ourselves so that we can be present for others. And, you know, in my experience, it doesn't always work. You know, you don't always get it right, but that's okay, because you'll learn something from it. They'll probably learn something from it. And so I have a big mantra for myself that I've learned over the years, which is I trust myself. In all situations, I trust myself, and that gives me confidence, because I may not get it right, I may not be perfect, but I'll trust myself to do the best I can. And that's what makes it such a privilege, I think, as a job. Oh, it's so much better than acting. My God, I wish I'd known about it before. Wouldn't have wasted those 12 years.
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, bearing in mind what you've been talking about, imposter syndrome and, you know, self-doubt and that sense of, you know, learning through the work we do on ourselves, learning to be comfortable or to accept the imperfection in ourselves means that we can really hold the space for our coachees to do the same. You know, so
I think that's the most special thing, actually. If I had someone in front of me who was perfect, got everything right, I think that would make me a bit nervous. I love the imperfection. You know, when I'm being coached, I love the humility, the vulnerability, the let's try this out. I don't know if it's going to work or not. You know, I love that collaboration. And I know some people want all the answers, just tick, 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 do that. That's great. Thanks very much. But I don't think they really want that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Janie.
Thank you.
So just before I start to bring the session to close, again, it'd just be interesting for Janie and I just to see some reflections around, you know, maybe what's resonated for you, what you're taking away from this session. So please just, you know, feel free to add some comments to the chat panel as Janie and I are talking now. But, you know, Janie, one of the things I did want you to talk about today is just, you know, the work that we've been doing and, you know, I suppose launching the new program that we're doing around. And I'll just say the other part about presence is being able to include the unwanted as well, like a dog. Or yeah, joking. But yeah, maybe, you know, it's easy for me to talk about it, but perhaps, you know, in terms of the program and, you know, your I suppose, energy about the program,
Oh,
facilitative leadership that we're launching in October. Just perhaps share some thoughts around that.
it's an incredibly exciting for me to have the luxury of working with Damien, because I do feel like our work has this beautiful synergy. And you know, in many respects, I'm conscious that a lot of what I've talked about springs from mindfulness, working from the inside out. So the program that we put together, which I am so excited about, is an entirely experiential, interactive practice in facilitation, facilitative leadership, you know, and how we lead others with our presence. So we are going to be looking at things like vocal quality, how you use the voice, how you use the body, how you improvise and create a dynamic presence in a room, and then of course with the wonderful work that Damien does in mindfulness. So for me, the real power of it is this in to out sense of confidence that our participants will get. And so we get the first 2 days of full-on immersion, and then we split it out, so we have 2 separate days with a lot of support in between in terms of the participants' experience of implementing what we explore. And actually what I particularly love, you know, as a lovey coming into this work, working with Damien, who is so knowledgeable of the extraordinary, robust theory that's out there, which feels like an immense toolkit, and then understanding, not just having the toolkit on the page, but how do you step that up and bring it to life? I mean, I'm buzzing about it, actually. It feels like a really important opportunity, because a lot of this stuff is theoretical, or then you can go and do improvisation courses and stuff, but I don't think there's enough out there that helps us as facilitators. There's an expectation that, you'll be able to hold a room, just ask them some questions. And I think that's a really important skill to develop, especially at the moment in this, they call it the VUCA environment, you know, volatile, uncertain, all that. Most organizations seem to be going through that. How we hold those conversations is going to be increasingly critical, I think.
No, great. And the reason I wanted you to say that is because I wanted people to see your passion around the work that we'll be doing. So,
oh my God, I'm so excited.
Yeah, no, I know you are. But I really appreciate your time. You know, the group of, you know, read through a lot of comments around, you know, taking away the pieces around the breath, around the exercises.
Good.
You know, a couple of people are going to check out Marianne Rainey. So
yeah,
we created a bit of a following for her.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and you know, so thank you for your time.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you for listening, everybody. It's very generous of you.
And just to say to the group that, you know, the next session will be taking place in July. So it's a webinar on cultural intelligence. So really helping us think about how we work cross-culturally as coaches, as facilitators. So I hope you can join us for that session. Thanks again, Janie.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully connect with everybody soon. So bye for now.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.